Rome is usually described as something that happened. A beginning, a rise, a fall. But what if Rome was not an event, but a process? What if the Roman Empire did not collapse, but simply learned how to disappear into time? Long before the first emperor ruled, Rome discovered something most civilizations never do. That power does not survive by force alone. It survives by memory, by routine, by order, by making time itself feel structured, measured, and inevitable. Rome did not just conquer land. It conquered calendars, roads, law, habit. And in doing so, it taught humanity how to believe in permanence, even when nothing truly lasts. Tonight, this is not a story about ruins or battles. It is a story about how time bends around civilizations, and what happens when one believes it has mastered it. Because Rome is not buried in the past. It is still ticking, and we are living inside its shadow. When time first bent toward Rome, long before Rome ruled the world, before marble columns and imperial banners, before emperors imagined themselves eternal, time itself behaved differently along the banks of the Tiber. Not because clocks were inaccurate, not because calendars were undeveloped, but because Rome did something rare in human history. It did not simply exist inside time. It began to organize time around itself. Most civilizations are born into a rhythm they do not choose. Seasons dictate survival. Ancestral memory dictates identity. The past presses heavily on the present, and the future is little more than a hope whispered to the gods. Rome was different. From its earliest days, Rome treated time not as a sacred inheritance, but as a tool. This is where the bending began. Rome's founding story already reveals its relationship with time, not as history but as narrative power. Romulus and Remus, twins born of divine lineage, raised by a wolf, destined for violence and creation. The story does not aim for accuracy. It aims for inevitability. Rome did not begin with once upon a time. It began with, this was always meant to happen. By anchoring its origin in myth rather than memory, Rome freed itself from the burden that trapped other cultures. The Greeks looked backward endlessly. The Egyptians embalmed the past. Mesopotamia feared the future. Rome positioned itself at a precise psychological point, the present as destiny in motion. This is not accidental. It is strategic. To control people, you must first control how they perceive time. Early Rome was small, unstable, and constantly threatened. Surrounded by stronger neighbors, Rome should have disappeared like countless settlements before it. Yet it survived, adapted, absorbed, and eventually dominated. Why? Because Rome did not fight as if it were temporary. Even in its infancy, Rome behaved as though it would still matter centuries later. This mindset shaped everything, from law to warfare to architecture. Roman laws were written to outlast individuals. Roman roads were built to survive generations. Roman rituals emphasized continuity, not transcendence. While other societies asked, how do we please the gods today? Rome asked, how do we remain Rome tomorrow? That question alone bends time. Rome's earliest kings were not remembered for spiritual revelation or divine miracles. They were remembered for systems, walls, drainage, census records, legal precedents. These are not the tools of myth. They are the tools of permanence. Rome did not chase immortality through the soul. It chased immortality through structure. And structure changes how time flows. A structure assumes tomorrow exists. One of Rome's most subtle revolutions was its relationship with memory. Memory is how time becomes real to humans. What we remember shapes what we believe matters. Rome institutionalized memory. The names of ancestors were displayed in public. Victories were carved into stone. Defeats were reframed, absorbed, rewritten. Time became curated. This is where Rome quietly surpassed its rivals. Because memory is power. When you control what a society remembers, you control how it interprets the present, and what futures it believes are possible. Rome did not erase time. It edited it. Even Rome's calendar reveals this manipulation. Early Roman months were adjusted, renamed, expanded, restructured. Festivals honored events not just to celebrate them, but to re-anchor collective time around Roman identity. Time stopped being neutral. It became Roman. Days were no longer just days. They were reminders of who ruled, who built, who decided. This was not tyranny. It was psychological alignment. People began to live inside Roman time. The Republic marked a deeper shift. When Rome overthrew its kings, it did something radical. It declared that power itself would be temporary. Consuls would rule briefly. Authority would rotate. No one man would own the future. This sounds like restraint, but it was a form of temporal mastery. By limiting individual power, Rome ensured that the state itself became the longest-lasting entity. Men came and went. Rome remained. This taught citizens something profound. Loyalty was owed not to people but to continuity. Rome became larger than any lifespan. Here is where the bending intensifies. Roman citizens began to imagine themselves as part of something that existed before them and would exist after them. This altered behavior at a fundamental level. Sacrifice made sense. Patience became virtuous. Obedience felt meaningful. Time was no longer personal, it was collective. And collective time is dangerous when wielded well. Rome's enemies often misunderstood this. They fought for land, revenge, honor, survival. Rome fought for duration. A battle lost today mattered less than dominance tomorrow. A city destroyed could be rebuilt. A general disgraced could be replaced. Rome absorbed loss the way mountains absorb erosion. Slowly, invisibly, without changing direction. This is not strength of arms. This is strength of temporal vision. Even Rome's early expansion was cautious, almost reluctant. It did not rush toward empire. It waited, observed, adjusted. Rome learned something early. Time rewards those who can endure uncertainty. Where others chased immediate glory, Rome invested in inevitability. Roads before palaces. Law before ideology. Administration before mythology. Each decision compounded. Time began to lean toward Rome. But this bending was not purely external. It reshaped Roman consciousness itself. Romans began to see history not as cycles but as progression. Not eternal recurrence but expansion. This was rare in the ancient world. Most civilizations believed time repeated itself endlessly. Empires rose and fell as part of a cosmic rhythm. Rome quietly rejected that. Rome believed it could move forward. That belief alone separated it from the ancient past. And yet, this forward motion carried a hidden cost. When time bends toward a single power, everything else must adjust, or break. Rome's rise compressed surrounding cultures into its timeline. Their histories became footnotes. Their futures were rewritten. To live under Rome was to surrender your own sense of time. Your past became Romanized. Your present was regulated. Your future was decided elsewhere. Empire, at its core, is not land ownership. It is temporal ownership. By the time Rome became aware of its own momentum, it was already unstoppable. Generations had grown up believing Rome was permanent. Children inherited a world where Roman order felt natural, inevitable, eternal. This is the most dangerous stage of power. When people forget that time can move differently. When permanence feels normal. Because time always bends back. It always corrects. And Rome, for all its mastery, would eventually learn this. But not yet. At this moment, when time first bent toward Rome, the empire was not yet an empire. It was an idea learning how long it could last. And in that question lies everything that follows. The city that learned how to remember. Cities do not remember the way humans do. They have no minds, no dreams, no childhoods. And yet, some cities behave as if they carry memory in their bones. Rome was one of them. Long before it ruled continents, Rome understood something that most civilizations only discover too late. Memory is not the past, it is a force that shapes the present. And if memory can be shaped, curated, and preserved, then time itself becomes negotiable. Rome did not stumble into remembrance. It designed it. In early Rome, memory was not private. It was public, visible, ritualized. The Romans believed that what was remembered collectively mattered more than what was felt individually. This belief altered how history unfolded. Where other cultures passed memory through poetry or sacred storytelling, Rome embedded memory into daily life, into streets, into names, into habits so ordinary they became invisible. This is how a city learns to remember, not by nostalgia but by architecture of recall. Walk through early Rome and you would encounter memory everywhere. Not emotional memory, institutional memory. Names carved into stone. Victories etched into arches. Laws preserved, referenced, amended, but never erased. The Romans were obsessed with precedent. What had been done before mattered deeply. Not because it was morally right, but because it created continuity. Continuity is how time becomes stable. A society without memory lives only in reaction. Rome refused to react. It responded, using the accumulated weight of its own past as leverage. Memory became authority. One of Rome's most powerful inventions was the ancestral mask, the imagens maiorum. Wax faces of deceased ancestors were preserved and displayed during funerals. They were not art. They were reminders. A Roman did not mourn alone. He mourned in the presence of generations. This ritual did something subtle but profound. It collapsed time. The dead were not gone. They were watching, judging, expecting. The past became active. And when the past watches, behavior changes. In Rome, forgetting was dangerous. To forget an ancestor was to dishonor lineage. To forget a law was to invite chaos. To forget a defeat was to risk repeating it, unless, of course, the forgetting was intentional. Rome remembered selectively. This is where its brilliance and its manipulation becomes clear. Rome did not remember everything. It remembered what served stability. Failures were reframed as lessons. Losses were recast as temporary setbacks. Civil conflicts were rewritten as necessary purifications. Memory was edited until it produced obedience. The Roman Senate functioned as a living memory vault. Senators debated not just policy but precedent. What did our ancestors do? Was not a question, it was an argument. This anchored decision-making in time. Power was justified not by innovation, but by alignment with remembered wisdom. Ironically, this made Rome flexible. Because when memory is stable, adaptation feels safe. Change no longer threatens identity. It becomes evolution. Rome's approach to memory also shaped its relationship with conquered peoples. Unlike empires that erased local histories, Rome often absorbed them. Local gods were renamed. Traditions were preserved, but placed inside a Roman frame. This was not tolerance. It was temporal colonization. Rome allowed others to remember, so long as those memories pointed back to Rome as the present center. Your past could survive. Your future would be Roman. This strategy reduced resistance. People do not fight as fiercely when their memories are respected. They fight when memory is threatened. Rome understood this instinctively. By controlling how memory flowed, Rome controlled how people imagined continuity. And imagination is where loyalty is born. The city itself became a memory machine. Every monument was a timestamp. Every road a reminder of conquest. Every forum a stage where history repeated itself daily through speech and ritual. Rome trained its citizens to live inside a remembered narrative. You were not just alive, you were part of something unfolding across centuries. This created meaning, and meaning stabilizes time. But there is a shadow here. When a city remembers too well, it begins to resist the future. Memory, once protective, can become heavy. Rome began to measure greatness by what had already been achieved. Innovation was filtered through tradition. New ideas were judged by old standards. The past became a gatekeeper. This tension would grow. As Rome expanded, its memory system struggled to scale. The more it absorbed, the more it had to remember, or suppress. Contradictions accumulated. Different histories collided. Different timelines overlapped. Different truths demanded space. Rome responded by simplifying. Official history became cleaner, straighter, more heroic. Complexity was smoothed into narrative. This is where memory subtly transforms into myth. And yet, this transformation kept Rome alive. Because memory, even imperfect memory, creates continuity. And continuity is what allows civilizations to survive chaos. Rome's genius was not that it remembered perfectly. It was that it remembered usefully. Time for Rome was not a line stretching backward. It was a reservoir. Something to draw from when the present felt unstable. When crises emerged, Rome reached into memory, not for comfort but for justification. We have survived worse. Our ancestors endured more. This too will pass. These phrases are not optimism. They are temporal weapons. The city that learned how to remember gained something rare: resilience. But resilience has a cost. When memory becomes identity, forgetting becomes existential fear. And Rome eventually would fear forgetting more than it feared collapse. That fear would shape its future decisions. Its rigidity. Its refusal to let go. But for now, Rome's memory was still its strength. The city stood anchored in time, looking backward to move forward, believing with quiet confidence that as long as it remembered itself, it could never truly disappear. It did not yet realize that memory alone cannot hold time forever. And that remembering, when done without reflection, can slowly turn into a prison. Power that outlived the men who held it. Most power dies with the body that carries it. A king falls. A warlord is assassinated. A dynasty ends. And the world moves on. Rome discovered something far more unsettling. Power does not have to belong to anyone at all. It can exist independently, circulating, transferring, surviving, long after the hands that once held it have turned to dust. This was Rome's most dangerous invention. In early societies, power was personal. It lived in bloodlines, divine favor, or brute strength. When a ruler died, the future fractured. Succession crises were not accidents. They were structural flaws. Rome saw this weakness and quietly removed it. Power in Rome was detached from the individual and embedded into roles, offices, procedures. A consul mattered less than the consulship. A general was replaceable. Even kings, once removed, were never truly missed. Rome did not abolish power. It abstracted it. And abstraction survives time. This shift changed how Romans understood authority. You did not obey a man. You obeyed an office. The uniform mattered more than the face. The title carried more weight than the personality. This seems subtle, but it alters the psychology of an entire civilization. When power becomes impersonal, rebellion becomes abstract. You are no longer resisting a tyrant, you are resisting order itself. Rome understood this long before modern states did. The Republic perfected this system. Consuls served briefly. Power rotated. Emergency authority was granted temporarily and then revoked. On the surface, this looked like restraint. In reality, it was institutional immortality. By limiting how long any one man could rule, Rome ensured that power itself never rested long enough to decay. Men aged. Offices remained young. This created a strange inversion. Individuals feared power more than they desired it. Because power was no longer personal, it was crushing. To hold authority in Rome was to become a vessel. A conduit for something older, heavier, more demanding than oneself. Mistakes were remembered. Failures echoed. The office survived. The man did not. Roman law was central to this endurance. Once written, laws outlived those who wrote them. They accumulated, layered, referenced. Each generation became accountable not only to the present, but to decisions made long ago. Time hardened power. A single ruling could echo for centuries. This created predictability, which created trust. But it also created rigidity. Power became slow. And slowness can feel eternal. Rome's military mirrored this philosophy. Legions were standardized. Training was uniform. Commanders came and went, but the system remained intact. A Roman soldier did not fight for a general. He fought for the continuation of Rome. This allowed Rome to lose battles without losing itself. Defeat did not collapse power. It redistributed it. But there is a deeper layer here. Power that outlives individuals begins to reshape human behavior in subtle ways. People stop asking, who should rule? They start asking, how does the system respond? Responsibility becomes diffused. Accountability becomes abstract. This is efficient, but also dangerous, because systems do not feel guilt. As Rome expanded, this impersonal power became seductive. Conquered elites quickly learned that survival depended on aligning with the system, not opposing individuals. Swear loyalty to Rome, not to a ruler, and you could outlast political shifts. Power became predictable. And predictability breeds compliance. Eventually, even emperors became trapped by the power they wielded. The emperor was not free. He was constrained by tradition, expectation, bureaucracy, and the ever-watchful weight of history. To rule Rome was not to command, it was to perform, to embody continuity. Many emperors broke under this pressure. Some tried to dominate it. Others tried to escape it through cruelty or excess. But none could dissolve it, because power no longer belonged to them. This is the paradox of Rome. By removing power from individuals, Rome created stability. But it also created something inhuman. Power became indifferent. And indifferent power does not care who it crushes. Time amplified this effect. Each generation inherited a system more complex than the last. Decisions made centuries earlier continued to shape lives. Rome's power became ancient while still functioning. This made it feel eternal, untouchable, unquestionable. Yet, power that outlives people also outlives wisdom. Contexts change. Values shift. Threats evolve. But the system persists. Rome's strength slowly became its burden. Because when power cannot die, it cannot adapt easily. And when it cannot adapt, time begins to resist it. Still, for centuries, Rome achieved something extraordinary. It proved that power could transcend mortality. That authority could be preserved like memory. That time could be harnessed, not just endured. Modern states, corporations, governments, all echo this Roman insight. We still live inside systems that outlived their creators. Rome was the first to show us how, and the first to reveal the cost. Power that outlives men does not disappear when men fall. It lingers, waiting, demanding to be fed by new hands. Hands that believe they are in control, until time reminds them otherwise. The Roman clock, how order was imposed on chaos. Chaos is the natural state of human existence. Left alone, societies fragment. Time dissolves into immediacy. Survival dominates thought. The future becomes short, uncertain, fragile. Rome looked directly at this chaos and did something radical. It did not try to eliminate it. It measured it. And measurement, more than force, is how order is born. Before Rome, time was experienced, not managed. Days followed the sun. Seasons followed the gods. History followed memory, rumor, and myth. Rome changed this by building what can only be described as a civilizational clock. A system that synchronized human behavior across vast distances and diverse populations. Not with gears and springs, but with law, ritual, schedules, and expectation. Rome taught people when to live. At the heart of Roman order was predictability. Markets opened at certain hours. Courts met on fixed days. Religious rituals followed regulated calendars. Military campaigns obeyed seasonal logic. Nothing was left to chance, not because Rome feared chaos but because it understood it too well. Chaos wastes time. And time, to Rome, was the most valuable resource of all. Roman time was public. Sundials stood in forums. Calendars were displayed openly. The passage of days was no longer a private intuition. It was a shared reference. This created synchronization. When people move together through time, coordination becomes possible. Trade stabilizes. Governance strengthens. Authority feels natural. Rome did not need to constantly remind people who was in charge. Time itself did the work. But the Roman clock was not neutral. It reflected power. Festivals aligned with political victories. Holidays honored Roman gods and Roman history. The very structure of the year reinforced Roman identity. To live under Rome was to adopt its rhythm. Your days no longer belonged entirely to you. They belonged to order. Law was the most precise instrument in this clock. Roman law did not just regulate behavior, it regulated expectation. Contracts assumed future fulfillment. Punishments assumed delayed consequences. Rights assumed continuity. The present became bound to the future through obligation. This altered human psychology. People began to think ahead, not spiritually but practically. Time stretched. Rome also imposed order on space, which indirectly imposed order on time. Straight roads replaced winding paths. Measured distances replaced uncertain journeys. Travel time became calculable. This changed how people perceive distance. And when distance becomes predictable, the world feels smaller. Rome compressed space and with it time. The military embodied the Roman clock in its purest form. Marching schedules, rotations, encampment routines. Discipline measured down to the hour. A legion did not rush. It advanced, step by step, day by day. Even war became procedural. This was terrifying to Rome's enemies, because chaos could not outpace order. Rome understood something ancient philosophers struggled to articulate. Order does not suppress freedom, it redirects it. Within Roman order, individuals found stability. Predictability allowed planning. Planning allowed ambition. Rome did not promise happiness. It promised continuity. And continuity is seductive. Yet beneath this clockwork precision lay tension. Because order imposed from above does not eliminate chaos, it contains it. The Roman system required constant maintenance, adjustments, corrections. Calendars were reformed, laws amended, authority reasserted. Time, despite Rome's efforts, resisted full control. As the empire expanded, the Roman clock strained. Different regions experienced time differently. Agricultural cycles varied. Cultural rhythms clashed. Rome responded by standardizing even more. Uniform law, uniform administration, uniform taxation. Order thickened. But thickness slows movement. Eventually the Roman clock became heavy. Its precision demanded obedience. Its predictability discouraged innovation. Its rigidity resisted change. What once imposed order now resisted adaptation. Chaos did not disappear. It waited. Still, Rome's achievement remains extraordinary. For centuries, millions of people lived inside a shared temporal structure. They woke, worked, worshipped, traded, and governed according to a rhythm that transcended individual lives. Time became institutional. This is Rome's enduring legacy. Modern schedules, bureaucracies, workweeks, legal deadlines, military time. We still live inside variations of the Roman clock. But every clock, no matter how precise, eventually drifts. And when correction is delayed too long, even order becomes a form of chaos. Rome believed it could master time by organizing it. For a long while it was right. But time is patient, and it always collects interest. The Roman clock did not stop suddenly. It slowed. And in that slowing, the empire's fate quietly began to change. Not through invasion, not through collapse, but through the subtle realization that order, once absolute, had become too rigid to bend with time itself. Empire as a state of mind. Empires are often explained in terms of territory. Borders drawn and redrawn. Armies marching. Flags planted into soil. But Rome was never just land. Rome was a way of thinking. And once that way of thinking took hold, the empire no longer needed to expand outward. It began expanding inward, into identity, expectation, and belief. This is how Rome truly conquered the world. Before Rome, power was visible. You could point to it. A king on a throne. A palace on a hill. A god in a temple. Rome made power psychological. To be Roman was not merely to live under Roman rule, it was to see the world as Rome saw it. Order over impulse. Law over passion. Continuity over glory. This mindset was taught, rewarded, normalized. Over time it became instinct. Rome did not demand loyalty through emotion. It cultivated habit. Citizens learned how to think in Roman categories. Citizen and non-citizen, legal and illegal, order and disorder, center and periphery. These distinctions structured reality itself. Once internalized, they required no enforcement. People began to police themselves. This mental empire was more durable than any wall. You could destroy a city. You could kill an emperor. But dismantling a worldview takes generations. Rome understood this intuitively. It focused less on convincing people to love Rome, and more on making life without Roman order feel unthinkable. Time played a crucial role. Rome trained its citizens to see the future as something managed by institutions, not fate. Security came from systems. Progress came from obedience. Stability came from repetition. The future stopped feeling mysterious. It felt scheduled. This reduced anxiety and increased dependence. The Roman citizen became a psychological construct, not defined by ethnicity or belief but by participation in order. To be Roman was to accept delay, procedure, hierarchy. Even ambition had rules. Even rebellion followed protocol. Rome's greatest success was making empire feel normal. After a generation, children born under Roman rule did not feel conquered. They felt located. Rome became the default frame through which reality was interpreted. This is when empire stops being visible and becomes permanent. But internal empire has consequences. When identity fuses with system, criticism feels like betrayal. Change feels like threat. Rome slowly lost the ability to imagine alternatives to itself. There was no outside perspective, only disorder beyond the border. This narrowed possibility. Empire as a state of mind also reshaped morality. Justice became procedural, not compassionate. Virtue became obedience, not wisdom. Good citizens followed rules. Greatness was measured by alignment, not originality. This produced stability, but also stagnation. Yet the Roman mindset was seductive. It offered meaning without mysticism, purpose without prophecy. You belonged to something vast, rational, enduring. Your life mattered because it fit into a larger mechanism. This answered a deep human need. Rome's enemies often failed to understand this. They fought Rome's armies. But Rome lived inside its people. Even conquered populations adopted Roman thinking because it simplified life. Complexity was replaced by clarity. Uncertainty was replaced by order. But no mindset is immune to time. As centuries passed, the Roman worldview hardened. What began as adaptive discipline became unquestioned dogma. The empire could no longer imagine itself differently. And when circumstances changed, Rome responded by enforcing mindset rather than rethinking it. This is how psychological empires begin to crack. Still, Rome's mental architecture outlived the empire itself. Long after legions withdrew and borders collapsed, Roman thinking persisted. Law codes, governance structures, concepts of citizenship and statehood. Even now, we unconsciously think in Roman terms. We inherit Rome's categories without remembering their origin. This is the final paradox. Rome fell, but its way of thinking did not. Empire as territory ended. Empire as mindset continued. And perhaps still continues. Because the most enduring empires do not conquer land. They conquer how humans think about time, order, and power. Rome mastered this art. And in doing so, it ensured that even in absence, it would never fully disappear. Roads that carried more than armies. The Roman road is often remembered as a military achievement. Stone laid with brutal efficiency. Straight lines cut across landscapes without apology. Paths wide enough for legions, strong enough to endure centuries. But armies were never the most important thing these roads carried. They carried time. They carried ideas. They carried Rome itself. Before Rome, distance fractured reality. A journey of a few days could feel like crossing worlds. Information aged as it traveled. Authority weakened with every mile. Rome refused to accept this. It understood something fundamental. Power dissolves when it cannot move. So it built roads not to conquer, but to connect. And connection alters how time behaves. Roman roads collapsed distance into calculation. Miles were measured. Travel time became predictable. Messages could be expected. This predictability changed governance. Orders issued in Rome no longer vanished into uncertainty. They arrived, on time, intact, enforceable. The empire began to breathe as one body. But something deeper was happening. When roads synchronize space, they synchronize experience. A merchant in Gaul, a soldier in Judea, a magistrate in Hispania, all lived inside the same temporal rhythm. News spread faster. Laws felt closer. Rome felt present. Even when physically distant. These roads carried culture. Language traveled. Customs migrated. Architectural styles replicated themselves along stone arteries. A forum in one city felt familiar to a traveler from another. This familiarity bred identity. Rome did not feel foreign. It felt recognizable. Memory moved along these roads as well. Stories of Rome's victories. Narratives of order and civilization. The idea that Rome was inevitable. Repetition solidified belief. The same symbols, the same rules, the same rhythms. Everywhere. This is how a worldview becomes normalized. The roads also carried discipline. Taxes moved efficiently. Troops arrived quickly. Rebellion felt futile. Resistance requires isolation. Rome destroyed isolation with stone. Yet these roads did not just serve the state. They reshaped private lives. People began to imagine movement differently. Opportunity felt closer. Horizons widened. Time felt faster. Rome compressed not just space but expectation. But compression has a cost. When everything is connected, disturbances travel quickly too. Revolts spread faster. Crises echoed farther. Epidemics moved with frightening efficiency. The same roads that unified Rome also transmitted its vulnerabilities. Still, the genius remains undeniable. Rome's roads outlasted the empire because they were not merely infrastructure. They were philosophy made physical. A belief that order should move. That authority should arrive. That time should obey distance. Even now, modern highways follow Roman logic. Directness over beauty. Efficiency over emotion. We still travel inside Roman assumptions. Rome believed that if it could reach everywhere, it could be everywhere. And for centuries it was. Not because armies marched, but because roads carried something far more enduring than soldiers. A shared sense of time, order, and belonging. Stone by stone, Rome taught the world how to move together. And in doing so, it ensured that even when the empire stopped marching, its paths would continue guiding human civilization forward, long after the legions were gone. The illusion of permanence. At some point, Rome stopped thinking of itself as temporary. This did not happen in a single moment. There was no decree, no proclamation, no philosophical turning point where the empire declared its own eternity. It happened quietly across generations through repetition, success, and survival. Rome endured crisis after crisis. Wars were won. Rebellions crushed. Borders expanded, then stabilized. Each generation inherited a world that still carried the same name, the same laws, the same rhythms. And slowly, almost unconsciously, permanence began to feel natural. This is where the illusion was born. Human beings are not designed to comprehend long durations. We understand lifetimes. At most, a few generations. Anything beyond that becomes abstract. Rome exploited this limitation. When a system lasts longer than anyone alive can remember, it stops feeling constructed. It starts feeling given. Like gravity. Like the sky. Rome ceased to feel like a political arrangement and began to feel like the structure of reality itself. The illusion of permanence is not arrogance. It is familiarity taken too far. Children born under Roman rule did not see an empire. They saw normality. Roman law was not law. It was simply how things worked. Roman authority was not power. It was background noise. And when power fades into the background, it becomes invisible, and therefore unquestioned. Rome's architecture reinforced this illusion. Stone does not age the way humans do. Monuments outlived generations. Roads survived dynasties. Aqueducts flowed without memory of who built them. The physical world whispered the same message every day: this will outlast you. Time seemed domesticated. The legal system deepened the illusion. Laws accumulated rather than disappearing. Precedent layered upon precedent. Each new ruling referenced centuries of authority. The present felt small compared to the past. Change became cautious. Why alter what has always worked? Rome's calendar, rituals, and public ceremonies repeated endlessly. Festivals returned each year. Titles remained unchanged. Offices rotated, but the structure remained fixed. Repetition creates stability, but also hypnosis. Time stopped feeling like movement and began to feel like rotation. The empire was always there yesterday. It would be there tomorrow. This illusion affected leadership most dangerously. Rulers began to act as if Rome could absorb any mistake, any excess, any delay. Urgency faded. Adaptation slowed. Why rush when time itself seems obedient? Yet permanence is the most fragile belief a civilization can hold. Because permanence discourages listening. Warnings are dismissed. Minor cracks are ignored. Slow decay is mistaken for stability. Rome mistook endurance for invincibility. The empire still faced enemies. Still faced economic strain. Still faced internal division. But these problems no longer felt existential. Rome had survived worse. Or so it believed. The illusion of permanence also altered how Romans understood the future. The future was no longer something to prepare for, it was something to inherit. The assumption was continuity. And assumptions are dangerous. Time, unlike stone, does not care about belief. It does not respect legacy. It does not preserve what refuses to change. Time does not destroy empires with violence. It erodes them with patience. Rome's greatest strength, its endurance, became a lens that distorted reality. Every delay felt safe. Every compromise felt manageable. Every crisis felt temporary. The empire stopped asking difficult questions. What if this does not pass? What if we must change? What if continuity itself is the problem? The illusion of permanence is comforting. It removes anxiety. It allows people to focus on living rather than surviving. But it also dulls perception. Rome, secure in its imagined eternity, began to move slower than time itself. And time never waits. The illusion did not shatter suddenly. It thinned. Crack by crack. Century by century. Rome did not collapse because it believed it was permanent, but because that belief delayed the moment when adaptation was still possible. Permanence in the end was not Rome's destiny. It was its most convincing illusion. And like all illusions, it only had to fail once to reveal what had been happening all along. Time had never stopped moving. Rome had simply stopped noticing. Time, blood, and the price of stability. Stability is never free. Every civilization that appears calm, ordered, and enduring is quietly paying for that calm in ways most people never see. Rome was no exception. In fact, Rome was the clearest proof that stability is not the absence of violence. It is violence managed over time. Rome did not eliminate bloodshed. It regulated it. And regulation, when stretched across centuries, changes how suffering is perceived. To understand Rome's stability, one must abandon the comforting image of peace as stillness. Roman peace, Pax Romana, was not gentle. It was controlled turbulence. Wars did not vanish. They were pushed outward. Punishment did not disappear. It was systematized. Death did not lessen. It became procedural. Stability, for Rome, meant that violence happened on schedule. Time played a critical role in making this acceptable. When violence is sudden, it shocks. When violence is constant, it traumatizes. But when violence is predictable, it becomes normal. Rome mastered predictability. Executions followed legal steps. Wars followed seasonal rhythms. Reprisals followed rebellion like clockwork. Nothing felt arbitrary. And because it was not arbitrary, it felt justified. The Roman citizen rarely saw the blood that sustained their stability. It flowed at the borders. In provinces. In arenas. Distance softened perception. Time dulled memory. The city felt peaceful because the violence occurred elsewhere, and continuously. This separation was intentional. Rome understood that stability depends on outsourcing disorder. The empire absorbed chaos so the center could remain calm. Barbarian frontiers bled so Rome could sleep. Yet even within the city, blood was never far. Public executions. Gladiatorial games. Punitive rituals. Violence was not hidden. It was ritualized. Ritual transforms fear into acceptance. By framing bloodshed as entertainment, justice, or necessity, Rome taught its people how to watch suffering without questioning the system that produced it. Time transformed this conditioning. Children grew up watching violence presented as normal. Adults learned to associate order with punishment. Generations internalized the idea that peace requires visible consequence. This was not cruelty for its own sake. It was psychological maintenance. Rome also paid in blood internally. Political purges. Civil wars. Assassinations. Stability was often restored only after intense internal collapse. But Rome reframed these moments as cleansing, a necessary reset. Bloodshed was recast as renewal. This reframing relied on time. Given enough years, even civil war becomes history. Given enough distance, trauma becomes narrative. Rome survived its internal violence by allowing time to turn pain into precedent. We have endured this before. That phrase carried enormous power. But blood has memory. Even when narratives soften, consequences remain. Every act of violence leaves residue: fear, resentment, silence. Rome accumulated this residue slowly. It did not explode. It settled. The price of stability was not only paid by victims. It was paid by the system itself. Because a society that relies on regulated violence must constantly justify it. And justification hardens institutions. Compassion becomes weakness. Mercy becomes risk. Adaptation slows. Rome became excellent at maintaining order, but poor at imagining alternatives. Every problem began to look like a threat. Every deviation felt dangerous. Every reform felt destabilizing. Blood had taught Rome caution. Time had taught Rome fear of change. This is the paradox. The more blood Rome shed to preserve stability, the more fragile that stability became. Because it could only exist under constant pressure. Release the pressure, and chaos returned. The Roman citizen lived inside this contradiction. Safe but not free. Secure but constrained. Protected but complicit. Most never questioned it. Stability is addictive. It feels like safety even when it costs others their lives. Time magnified this addiction. After centuries of order, the idea of instability became terrifying. Even reformers hesitated. What if change breaks everything? Rome began to choose familiar suffering over uncertain improvement. And this is where time becomes cruel. Because stability purchased with blood demands more blood over time, not less. The system cannot stop. Stopping feels like collapse. Eventually, Rome reached a threshold where the cost exceeded the benefit. Not suddenly. Gradually. The violence no longer produced security, it produced exhaustion. The system kept demanding sacrifice, but delivered diminishing returns. Rome did not fall because it was violent. It fell because violence stopped stabilizing. Time changed the equation. What once created order began to accelerate decay. This is the hidden lesson Rome offers. Stability is not peace. It is a temporary arrangement between time and power. And time always renegotiates. Rome paid for centuries of order with blood carefully spread across generations. The bill did not arrive all at once. It arrived slowly. And by the time Rome realized how much it owed, time had already moved on, leaving behind a civilization that mistook endurance for balance and stability for justice. The price had been paid, but the cost was still rising. When the present became too heavy to carry. There is a moment in every long-lived civilization when the present stops feeling like a bridge and starts feeling like a burden. Rome reached that moment quietly. Not during invasion. Not during collapse. But during continuity. For centuries, Rome had mastered the art of carrying time forward. It absorbed the past, stabilized the present, and assumed the future would resemble what had already endured. That assumption worked, until the present itself became too dense with history, obligation, and expectation to move. Time did not break Rome. Weight did. At first, the burden was invisible. Rome still functioned. Laws were enforced. Armies marched. Taxes were collected. Rituals repeated. The machinery of empire continued to turn. But something subtle changed in how Romans experienced now. The present no longer felt alive. It felt inherited. Every decision was constrained by precedent. Every reform was measured against tradition. Every leader ruled under the shadow of what Rome had been, not what it might become. The present stopped being creative space. It became administrative labor. Rome had accumulated too much past. Centuries of law layered upon law. Privileges stacked upon privileges. Obligations multiplied without disappearing. Each generation inherited systems designed for earlier problems, earlier populations, earlier realities. Yet removing them felt impossible. Because those systems were not just functional, they were symbolic. To dismantle them felt like erasing memory. And Rome feared forgetting more than it feared inefficiency. Time began to slow, not in reality but in perception. Decisions took longer. Responses lagged. Adaptation hesitated. Rome still reacted, but always a step behind events. The empire had become reactive, not anticipatory. This is the sign of temporal exhaustion. The weight was not only institutional, it was psychological. Roman citizens no longer felt they were participating in the making of history. They felt they were maintaining it. Maintenance is tiring. It lacks vision. It lacks momentum. And it slowly drains meaning. Consider leadership. Early Roman leaders carried ambition lightly. They believed Rome was still becoming something. Later leaders inherited a finished monument. Their task was not to build, but to preserve. Preservation is cautious. Preservation avoids risk. Preservation fears disruption. And fear shapes time. The future narrowed. Rome could imagine continuation, but not transformation. Change became associated with danger. Innovation felt irresponsible. Why alter what has lasted so long? This question haunted every reform. Even crisis failed to restore urgency. Economic strain, border pressure, social fragmentation. Each problem was addressed with temporary measures, not structural change. Because structural change threatened accumulated order. Rome chose short-term stability over long-term adaptation. Again and again. The present became crowded. Too many laws to enforce fully. Too many offices to coordinate. Too many traditions to honor simultaneously. The system demanded constant attention simply to remain standing. This left little energy for imagination. Time began to feel oppressive. The past pressed down. The future felt distant and abstract. The present felt like responsibility without reward. This is a dangerous emotional state for any civilization. Because when the present feels unbearable, people either escape or surrender. Many Romans escaped inward. Spiritual movements grew. Personal salvation replaced civic purpose. Attention shifted from public life to private meaning. This was not decay. It was exhaustion. When collective time loses meaning, individuals seek refuge in personal time. Others surrendered to apathy. Participation declined. Civic engagement weakened. Authority felt distant, heavy, impersonal. The empire still ruled, but it no longer inspired. Power remained, but purpose thinned. Rome had become too successful for its own temporal health. Its endurance had created accumulation without release. No system, no matter how brilliant, can carry infinite history without shedding weight. Rome refused to shed. Time noticed. Change accelerated outside Rome's control. New forms of organization emerged. New pressures reshaped the world faster than Rome could respond. The empire's internal clock fell out of sync with external reality. Not catastrophically. Gradually. The present stretched uncomfortably. Every solution created new complications. Every reform demanded more administration. Rome kept adding layers instead of simplifying. This made the system stronger and heavier. Eventually, even stability began to feel fragile. Not because collapse was imminent, but because everything depended on constant effort. Remove attention, and cracks appeared. Remove pressure, and order weakened. Rome had built a civilization that required endless maintenance to survive. Time does not favor such systems. This is the quiet truth behind Rome's later centuries. It did not fall suddenly. It tired. The present demanded too much. People sensed it before historians ever would. They felt it in delays, in confusion, in distance between rule and reality. They felt it when decisions felt arbitrary rather than purposeful. They felt it when the future stopped feeling inviting. Rome had once bent time toward itself. Now time resisted being carried. The present was no longer a moment, it was a load. And civilizations, like individuals, can only carry so much before something gives. Not necessarily collapse. Sometimes just letting go. Rome would soon learn that letting go is not the same as ending. But in this moment, when the present became too heavy to carry, The empire crossed an invisible threshold. Time was no longer flowing through Rome. Rome was struggling to keep up with time. The slow unraveling no one could see. Collapse is easy to recognize in hindsight. Broken cities, empty treasuries, abandoned roads, silent institutions. But collapse is rarely experienced as collapse while it is happening. It is experienced as continuation with discomfort. Rome did not wake up one morning and realize it was unraveling. It woke up and went to work. And that is why no one could see it. The most dangerous failures are not dramatic. They are gradual misalignments between reality and expectation. Rome still expected its systems to function as they always had. It still trusted its structures, its laws, its rhythms. And for a long time those systems did function, just slightly worse than before. Slight delays, minor shortages, occasional breakdowns. Nothing alarming. Nothing urgent. This is how unraveling hides. It disguises itself as inconvenience. Time played a cruel role here. Rome measured success in centuries. A bad decade meant little. A weak generation could be absorbed. The empire had survived far worse, or so it believed. That belief created tolerance for decay. What should have felt alarming felt manageable. The unraveling was not centralized. It happened unevenly. A road neglected here. A garrison understaffed there. A province slowly drifting out of sync. Each issue felt local. Together they formed a pattern. But patterns are invisible when no one is looking for them. Rome's administrative brilliance became a liability. Problems were categorized, filed, deferred. Responsibility moved upward. Decisions moved slowly. The system worked but too well. It processed decline without panic. The economy strained quietly. Currency lost trust gradually. Prices shifted unevenly. Tax burdens became heavier not through cruelty but necessity. The system compensated by demanding more effort for the same output. This exhausted those at the bottom long before those at the top felt danger. Social cohesion thinned. Citizenship expanded but meaning diluted. Loyalty became abstract. Participation declined. People still lived under Rome, but no longer for Rome. That distinction matters. The military adapted, just not fast enough. Recruitment expanded. Discipline softened. Command stretched thin. Rome still fielded armies. They just no longer felt invincible. Fear crept in, not of defeat but of uncertainty. Leadership struggled with perception. Each emperor faced immediate problems, not existential ones. Reforms were partial. Solutions temporary. No one ruled long enough to feel responsible for slow decay. Time fragmented accountability. Rome's greatest advantage, its patience, became its blindness. The empire assumed that because decline was slow, it was controllable. But slowness is not safety. It is simply quiet. Cultural narratives adapted to this new reality. Writers spoke of decline, but framed it as moral weakness, not structural strain. Blame shifted to individuals, not systems. This preserved belief in Rome while undermining trust in people. The unraveling continued beneath language. Institutions became heavier. Coordination weakened. Trust thinned. Everything still existed. Nothing worked quite as intended. Time refused to announce the moment. There was no clear before and after. Only a long in-between. This is why Rome's fall is misunderstood. We search for dates, invasions, betrayals. But the unraveling had already happened. What followed were symptoms. Rome did not collapse because it failed suddenly. It collapsed because it continued functioning long after alignment was lost. Systems built for one tempo tried to operate in another. Time had changed speed. Rome had not. People adapted individually. They lowered expectations. They relied on local networks. They withdrew from imperial identity. The empire still existed, but as an idea more than a lived reality. By the time outsiders pressured Rome militarily, the inner unraveling was complete. The structure stood. The spirit had already thinned. No one could see it because no one wanted to. Acknowledging unraveling would have meant questioning permanence, stability, and identity. And Rome had taught its people not to question those things. This is the cruel elegance of slow collapse. It feels survivable until it is not. It allows denial. It avoids panic. It rewards short-term thinking. Time did not strike Rome. It waited. And as Rome adjusted to discomfort instead of addressing misalignment, time quietly moved on, leaving behind a civilization still standing, still functioning, but no longer synchronized with the world it once ruled. The unraveling was complete long before the ending arrived. And by then, no one remembered what a different future had once felt like. Collapse without an ending. Rome did not end the way stories teach us to expect endings. There was no final scene where the lights went out all at once. No universal realization that this was it. No shared moment of closure. What happened instead was far more unsettling. Rome collapsed without feeling like it was collapsing. Because collapse, when stretched across time, stops behaving like an event and starts behaving like a condition. People imagine collapse as interruption. Rome experienced it as continuation. Courts still convened. Titles were still granted. Taxes were still demanded. Emperors were still crowned. Life went on. And that is precisely why the ending never arrived. By the time historians point to the fall, most Romans were already living in a world where the empire existed more as memory than experience. The roads still lay beneath their feet, but fewer were repaired. The law still existed, but fewer were enforced evenly. The authority still spoke, but fewer listened instinctively. Rome had not vanished. It had thinned. Time does something strange to long systems. It erodes edges first. Clarity dissolves before structure. Meaning fades before form. Belief disappears before institutions. Rome lost conviction long before it lost territory. The Western Empire is often treated as the ending. Invasions, sackings, deposition of emperors. But for most people alive at the time, nothing ended. A new ruler replaced the old. A new authority collected taxes. Local life adapted. Rome's absence felt administrative, not existential. Because the empire had already withdrawn psychologically. This is the paradox of collapse without an ending. When systems decline slowly, people do not experience loss as loss. They experience it as adjustment. Lower expectations. Smaller ambitions. Local solutions. Rome did not break. It decentralized. The idea of Rome continued even as the reality fractured. Churches inherited Roman structures. Kings adopted Roman titles. Law codes echoed Roman logic. Rome dissolved into successors without ever saying goodbye. Time made this possible. Because time allows replacement to masquerade as continuity. If one generation replaces another without rupture, the illusion of survival remains intact. Rome survived in pieces, in habits, in language, in assumptions about authority and order. The Eastern Empire demonstrates this most clearly. Rome fell in the West, but continued in the East for centuries. Same laws, same identity, same claim to continuity. Which Rome ended? The one on the map, or the one in the mind? Collapse without an ending confuses memory. People argue about dates because they are searching for emotional resolution. But Rome did not give one. It faded. This fading created something new. A world built from Roman remnants but no longer governed by Roman time. Local rulers moved faster. Customs adapted. Identity fragmented. Time regained irregularity. Rome had once synchronized vast populations. Now synchronization broke apart. Different regions lived in different tempos. Some moved slowly, preserving fragments of order. Others changed rapidly, experimenting, improvising. This was not chaos. It was plural time. Rome's collapse did not create darkness. It created diversity. The illusion of one center dissolved. Multiple futures emerged. Yet something profound was lost. A shared sense of continuity. Rome had given people the feeling that history moved in one direction, under one system, toward one horizon. That feeling vanished. Time became uncertain again. This uncertainty frightened later generations. They called it decline. They called it decay. They called it a fall. But fear often mislabels transformation. Rome's ending never arrived because Rome had already completed its most important work. It taught humanity how to build systems that outlive individuals. It taught power how to survive death. It taught time how to be organized. Once that lesson was absorbed, Rome no longer needed to exist as a single entity. Its function was complete. This is the quiet truth beneath the myth. Rome did not fail to survive. It succeeded so completely that its form became unnecessary. Collapse without an ending is not defeat. It is diffusion. Rome became background architecture for future civilizations. Invisible, assumed, unquestioned. This is why Rome still haunts us. Because it never truly left. It dissolved into our laws, our governments, our calendars, our roads, our expectations of order. We live inside the afterlife of Rome. And perhaps that is the most unsettling ending of all. Not a ruin, not a grave, but a civilization so deeply absorbed into time that no one can say where it stopped, and where we began. Rome ended without an ending. And in doing so, it became eternal in a way no empire ever intended. Rome after Rome. Rome did not disappear when its banners fell. It dispersed. Like heat after a fire goes out, Rome spread into places that no longer remembered the flame, but still felt the warmth. This is the strange fate of civilizations that master time too well. They stop existing as locations and begin existing as assumptions. Rome became an afterimage. After the empire fragmented, people did not suddenly feel unrolled. They felt re-ruled. New kings adopted Roman titles. New capitals borrowed Roman layouts. New authorities justified themselves using Roman law, Roman language, Roman legitimacy. Even those who claimed to replace Rome quietly admitted something essential. Power made sense only if it resembled what Rome had already taught the world to accept. The collapse removed the center, not the structure. Administration survived in churches. Law survived in codes. Infrastructure survived in stone. Rome's skeleton remained standing even as its body decayed. And skeletons last a long time. Time altered Rome's presence but did not erase it. In the West, Roman authority became memory rather than command. Yet memory still shaped expectation. People asked not, who rules us? But, who rules us properly? Proper rule still meant Roman order. Predictability. Hierarchy. Procedure. Even rebellion used Roman logic. The Church understood this better than anyone. It did not destroy Rome's systems. It inherited them. Bishops replaced magistrates. Dioceses replaced provinces. Canon law mirrored imperial law. The Church did not reject Roman time. It baptized it. Eternity replaced empire, but structure remained. This was not coincidence. Rome had already trained people to think institutionally. Faith fit easily inside that frame. Authority without visible force. Order without armies. Continuity without emperors. Rome's greatest creation learned how to live without Rome. In the East, the illusion of continuity remained intact. The empire still called itself Roman. Its citizens still believed they lived in Rome. This reveals something essential. Rome was never a place. It was an agreement. An agreement about how time should feel, stable, linear, administered. As long as that agreement held, Rome lived. Across Europe, emerging kingdoms borrowed Roman legitimacy to stabilize themselves. Crowns required law. Law required precedent. Precedent pointed backward. Always backward. To Rome. Even when rulers claimed divine right, they organized power in Roman ways. Courts. Records. Taxes. Hierarchies. God may have crowned them, but Rome taught them how to rule. This persistence reshaped how history unfolded. Rather than starting fresh, Europe layered itself on top of Rome. Innovation moved slowly. Tradition dominated. The past remained heavy. Time did not reset. It accumulated. Rome also survived in language. Latin did not vanish. It fractured. French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese. Each carried Roman logic in grammar, structure, and abstraction. Language carries thought. Rome lived in how people formed ideas. Legal systems preserved Roman categories. Property, contract, citizenship, obligation. These concepts feel natural today. They are not. They are Roman. Time after Rome became uneven. Without a single center, different regions moved at different speeds. Some clung tightly to Roman order. Others adapted freely. This created tension, but also creativity. The world became less synchronized, more experimental. Yet even experimentation occurred within Roman boundaries. People challenged authority, but used Roman reasoning. They sought freedom, but defined it legally. They rebelled, but documented their claims. Rome shaped how resistance itself was imagined. This is the true reach of Rome after Rome. It did not demand obedience. It shaped possibility. What could be imagined as legitimate? What felt normal? What felt dangerous? Time transformed Rome from ruler to reference. Whenever societies faced uncertainty, they looked back. What did Rome do? This question haunted centuries. It still does. But something subtle changed. Rome's endurance became cautionary. Its collapse, however undefined, served as warning. People feared repeating its mistakes. Centralization, overreach, rigidity. Yet they repeated its structures anyway, because abandoning Rome entirely felt like stepping into chaos. This reveals Rome's final paradox. It taught humanity how to organize time and power so effectively that we struggle to imagine alternatives. Even now, even here, Rome after Rome is not nostalgia. It is inheritance. We live inside systems that assume continuity, legality, hierarchy, and administration. We schedule time. We document authority. We expect order. These expectations did not come from nature. They came from Rome. And yet time continues. New pressures emerge. New technologies compress space faster than Rome ever could. Old systems strain. Once again, the present feels heavy. Once again, adaptation feels risky. Rome's shadow stretches into our moment. The question is not whether Rome still exists. It does. The question is whether we can recognize when inherited structures no longer align with present reality. Rome could not. That is why it diffused instead of transforming. Rome after Rome teaches us that civilizations do not truly die. They migrate into habits, into institutions, into assumptions about how the world should work. Rome's final form was not an empire. It was a framework. And frameworks are difficult to see, especially when they surround you. Rome no longer commands. It informs. It whispers. And as long as we continue to organize time, power, and meaning the way Rome taught us to, Rome will remain, quietly shaping futures it never imagined, long after its own ending dissolved into memory. Here is a cinematic ending CTA that fits seamlessly with the tone, philosophy, and continuity of the documentary, not promotional, not abrupt, but earned. Rome did not end. It transformed, fragmented, echoed. It lived on in laws that outlasted emperors, in borders drawn long after legions vanished, in the idea that power can survive the people who wield it. And perhaps that is the quiet truth history keeps trying to tell us. Civilizations do not collapse when they fall. They collapse when they forget why they existed. Rome believed it had mastered time. It measured it, organized it, disciplined it. But time was never Rome's possession. Time was watching. What remains is not ruins or marble or names carved into stone, but patterns. Patterns of ambition. Patterns of control. Patterns of forgetting. Patterns of believing this moment will last forever. And that is where Rome meets us. Not in the past, but in the present. If this story felt uncomfortably familiar, that was not coincidence. If certain moments felt like reflections rather than history, that was intentional. Because the Roman Empire is not behind us. It is within us, in how we build, in how we rule, in how we remember, and in how we assume the future will obey us. Time does not punish civilizations. It simply waits for them to misunderstand it. If you want to explore more stories like this, stories that exist between history, consciousness, and the unseen forces shaping human destiny, subscribe to Secrets Beyond Time. Here we do not just study the past. We listen to what it is still trying to say. Because time is not finished with us yet.